Yay, the last unit, you made it, the end of the last unit. So this is the end of unit number 5. This is chapter 10. You've been hanging in. You should feel really good about yourself. So we're going to talk about normative stressors, which is really talking about family over the lifespan, because normative has a lot to do with things that are expected at each point in life. So talk about that. You're going to wrap up your DQ, do your last exam, and then with the time that remains, I'll send a note about some opportunities during that time. Okay, but this is the end of the line. Your obligations are winding up. Okay, before we get you excited, let's dig in here to the material. So what I'm going to do for this unit, and you'll see some additional, see some additional stuff on the review sheet. What I'm going to do here in lecture, and the review sheet stuff that's not from this, will come from the book, of course, and be real clear, is I'm going to sprint through the lifespan. Talk about children, adolescence, college years, engagement, marriage, parenting, middle adulthood, older adulthood. Sprint through them. So let's talk a tiny bit about something that probably seems eons ago to you in the theory chapter. I talked a little bit about a developmental approach, a developmental theory versus lifespan approach. So what developmental theory is very like staircase, very structurally clean, strict linear stages to life. So something like what I just showed you. First you're a kid, then you're an adolescent, then you go to college, then you get engaged, you get married, you become a parent. Okay, and you and I know it doesn't always work cleanly like that. So a little bit different from a developmental approach is a lifespan approach, where you still consider the fact that we're growing and changing, but that individual, generational, which means cohorts, historical, time, and all of these things, there's no strict sense of stages. So you might think of it like loops going up in time. You know, you move forward a little bit, then you move this way, then you move that way. And still you're changing and evolving, but it's just less rigid than developmental. But with both of these, we're recognizing that people don't stay the same throughout their life. They change over time, and communication and relationships are important throughout our lives, which, so important. And we'll talk about this more in Communication and Aging, where we talk about older adults, those who are 65 and older. But I want to do a bit of it here now. We're talking about the family. I'm not going to do it justice. I'm going to sprint through. But I like doing this to give you a sense of life in these ways and review some of the things we've already talked about. First, children in the family. So, mothers and infants have bidirectional communication. Meaning we think a lot, even in the attachment stuff, about parents communicating to their children, but really there's this bidirectional influence where the children are also influencing their parents. You know, parents respond to when their babies smile or laugh. When babies have colic and they cry and cry and cry, it changes something in the parent. Children influence their parents as well. It's bidirectional. In less than 3 months, the mother can read her baby. As a matter of fact, when you pay attention to people in hospitals who've just given birth, usually babies are with their moms and dads or whomever is in there. They try and keep the baby close to the mother in the hospital for lots of health purposes. But if the baby leaves the mother's side to go down the hall to be circumcised or checked for different things, whatever it may be, the mother can tell when there's a cry if it's her baby or not. I mean, it's just amazing. And she can also read her baby. She can read when her baby's cry means the baby's hungry or sad or just crying to cry. Really amazing. At 3 months, there's reciprocal communication. That bidirectional is truly reciprocal. And at 6 months, the children initiates most of the communication. So the child is the one that gets into it with a cry or a laugh or a sneeze. They're the initiator of most interactions at 6 months. At 1 year, children model their mother and their attachment grows stronger. And we talked about that already. And this communication predicts their future communication. When you're a young child at about 3, this is an interesting trend. I think it's very telling. The stress level of your parents it manifests in the children's behavioral problems. They have less self-assertion and they have less pretend play. So when Creasy observes children playing at age 3, he sees gosh, I collect this data from parents. When the parents are stressed out, this is what I see in the kids. So it shows you how these two things go together. Also, compared to moms, dads are more affected by their children's communication. So we look at what children are doing, and then we see parents' responses. We see that dads are actually, their behavior and their feelings change more based on what the kid is doing, where moms tend to stay at the same level in terms of their own affect. Siblings, and we're thinking about the sibling relationship, so important in the family. Quality in the sibling relationship is related to parent-child communication. So a lot of times perceived preferential treatment, so favoritism that a child thinks is being displayed from a parent to another sibling will negatively influence that sibling bond. And it's all about perception, as usual. When it comes to conflict, you perceive different goals, that's a conflict, even if you don't have different goals. When it comes to siblings, you perceive that your parents favor your brother, even if they don't. That's going to squelch the quality of your relationship. Perception is key. Longest and most influential relationship is the sibling. Now, I think many scholars would say, what? Parent-child is the most influential. But when you think about the amount of time you know your sibling and how a lot of messages that your parents give are really impacted by the sibling bond or reinforced or not, you can see why it would be called the most influential relationship. It's hard to really prove that empirically, but it is certainly the longest for most people. Birth order differences in communication. Let's talk about these a little bit. So there are some small but significant trends. They're small though. Firstborn children are more independent. They tend to be more goal-oriented and they tend to be higher achievers than laterborns. A downside of that is they tend to be harder on themselves than laterborns. They want to please and they're hard on themselves when they don't. Whereas laterborns are less hard on themselves. They're more free-spirited and they'll take risks and they don't get upset when they don't do very well, when they don't win and things like that. But at the same time, they don't have the same drive that firstborns have, particularly if it's something they're not interested in. Middle children, so there's this middle child syndrome. I kind of roll my eyes. I don't mean to be rude. There is a small but significant effect for middle children. They do experience some differences and also some benefits. Middle children make the best romantic partners, some research suggests, because of their comfort in managing these other siblings and the family relationships. But listen, these are small differences. These are very small differences. But one thing that families can definitely do is they can be mindful. The baby in the family is often treated as the baby. They're given so much slack and less responsibility, and this can be harmful to them as grown-ups. They're not as responsible. So one thing parents can do from an early age is, even if they're kind of making things up, you say to the baby in the family, you know what, you're in charge. Don't really leave them in charge. Go do some laundry or something while you're peeking around and make sure everything's okay in there. But, making them understand that they also can be a leader. And making firstborns understand that they're also a kid and not a parent. Those things are really smart to do. So the next thing is differentiation among siblings. So sibling differentiation is when you've got siblings, and what they'll do is one sibling will be, let's say, the pianist in the family. They play piano, they're brilliant at it. Well, what the other sibling will do is they'll think, I love that my brother or sister does that, but I need to be different. I need to have my own identity. So they'll go this way, and they might be really involved in sports. It might be Republican, Democrat. It might be comedian versus very serious mathematician. But sibling differentiation is this way that siblings look to each other and say, how can I be unique and special? Sex differences exist. Females are more involved in their relationships, and we've talked about that a bit throughout the semester, but please don't inflate these trends. Adolescence and family. Many children begin to mentor younger siblings when they're adolescents. Parents rate the relationship better than children rate it. This is across the board, all ages. Children are also more influenced by peers than family during this stage than they have ever been before. So children and adolescents are going to turn to their peers more, and that's why parents freak out, right? They're afraid they'll do all these crazy things or get hurt. The reality of it is that there's still a link from parents to kids even when the kids become adolescents. Parent verbal aggressiveness and child verbal aggressiveness into adolescence is very highly correlated, and also peer and child verbal aggressiveness. So yeah, we can say that they're aggressive because they're around aggressive peers, but then those peers and kids also tend to have aggressive parents. So maybe the aggressive parents have aggressive kids, and those aggressive kids seek out aggressive friendships. So, it all sort of works together. Parent confirmation, so messages about the relationship itself, they improve the psychological adjustments of adolescence. So it just demonstrates that parents are still important. As kids grow up, and teasing gets more playful, kids grow up, so teasing gets more playful as we age. We do return to our roots. So in other words, we're children who are similar to our parents, going all the stuff in our last semester. We get to adolescence, they're going to be more we're going to tease and be more playful. But then what happens? We see them come back to their parents and be the level of playfulness that they were before they were adolescents. And that's just one of many trends that demonstrates kids come back to their roots. But you really got to just get through adolescence. Adolescent satisfaction and closeness with their parents is linked to how often they openly communicate with their parents and how frequently and how open they are. So communicating. So we've talked about that throughout the semester. But we see that in adolescence, a time when both parties might be leery to talk to each other as much, if you can keep that contact going, you can communicate, you can interact with each other a lot, then your adolescents are going to be more satisfied. The less conflict you have as parents, the more satisfied your adolescents are going to be, regardless of the family form. So whether parents are together or apart. Step-families do sometimes experience more conflict, but you got to be really careful here. When it comes to conflict and its effect on children, I cannot stress enough that conflict and its stress is all the conflict. So when parents stay together and they're in high conflict relationships for the sake of the kids, they're not doing their kids a service, because that conflict is what hurts them. If you divorce and you continue to have conflict, then that's not helping either, and then you have the added stressor of a divorce. But if you divorce, you separate, and the conflict is minimized by that, that is healthier for children. Conflict is bad news. Bad news. High levels and not resolved conflict, and certainly abuse. And there's an increased need for autonomy in adolescence. There's also, when there's a decrease, when there's an increase in autonomy, and there's a decrease in experimenting with drugs and alcohol and other acts of rebellion, that's when we see that adolescent satisfaction go up. So that's what those are all about. Plow on ahead to the college years and family. Oops, not that fast. Most perceptions about family come from college students. So we collect a lot of data from college students when we try and understand the family. There are pluses and minuses to that. The plus is that college students are thinking about forming their own new families in a few years. Also, they just came out of their family relationships, and so they can reflect on that, think, back to the not so distant past with some clarity. And the minuses are some of those same things. Also a minus is that they haven't experienced so much that we're really interested in assessing yet, like long-term relationships. Well, they haven't been in romantic relationships for a long time, so we can't address that. But there's a lot that we can learn, particularly about family, even more so than interpersonal relationships, because they've been in that family. Hurtful messages about education. So this is one, say, that I was a part of a million years ago. So hurtful messages that parents communicated about their college students' education really didn't have a big effect on the self-esteem or adult children's motivation to succeed. So college students were showing us that when their parents are really nasty about education, even doing super naughty things, like saying, why can't you be more like your brother, which is one of the worst things. Parents should never compare their children like that. It's so harmful in so many ways. But anyway, but parents do it, and I don't judge them. Just the behavior is not a good choice. But anyway, this scholarly, this ridicule of children, why can't you do better in school? Why can't you do better? It really doesn't hurt college students' self-esteem or their motivation to succeed. So when we're trying to understand, well, maybe what's going on here is that peers, teachers, and others who are right in that environment may be more impactful. So if I, as your instructor, say, oh my gosh, this work is amazing, you're not going to care very much that your dad's like, why can't you do better in school? At the same token, if I say, this is awful, what did you do? That could be a hurtful thing, even if your dad is like, well, it seems fine. So hurtful messages about education from parents don't seem to be incredibly impactful. So also in college years, this is some interesting stuff. So when we look at communicated disappointment, we talked about the silent treatment a little bit already, but there are other ways of indirectly communicating that we're disappointed. We could show it with all of our nonverbals. We could do sighs, all sorts of things. And silent treatment is a common one. And what we see is that college students say that when someone in their family communicates disappointment in this way about how the child is performing in college, their relationships, their behaviors, that when that happens, children tend to feel a lack of control. And that's not a good thing. Now, it also happens that moms use these indirect methods more than dads use them. That is a trend that we saw, and that I'm replicating some of this in my own data, and I'm seeing some of the same trends, and that college women are enacting the silent treatment a little bit more than men. But these are really small differences. But try not to do those indirect methods. They're not good. Just tell the person, tell them nicely that you're disappointed. Distance and new experiences keep the parent-child bond satisfied. So when students are in college and advanced degrees, they tend to be less close with their parents, but to be happier with that lessened closeness. So closeness and satisfaction often go together, but we see here sometimes they are negatively correlated. It happens with in-laws sometimes too. But will this change? I don't know. Helicopter parents are this hot topic. Parents that hover, and then they swoop in to solve their children's problems, and they swoop back out. They're overbearing. These are not that common of a thing as you might think when you hear about them in the news and stuff, but they're more common than they used to be. And so, maybe kids are less satisfied when they grow up and they're away from their parents. But traditionally, college students like a little bit of distance. It's good for their relationship with their mom and dad. Let's talk about living together during or after college. This is more of a trend for your cohort than it was for previous generations. We've talked a little bit about it, but I haven't specified the specific types. So there are different types. There are those who plan to stay together, who see cohabitation as an ultimate union, versus those who are really unsure. Hey, let's see how it goes. And there are some who they're less studied, but who see cohabiting as simple convenience. Got kicked out of my apartment. I have an abusive romantic partner. I need to get out of there, so come live with you. Oh, we're dating. These pure convenience type scenarios. So to trial run, to something considered very, very serious in terms of the level of commitment. So there's so many different types of cohabiting couples. So the communication among them varies by type. But I want to tell you a really ironic trend here. So I see an ironic trend in that when it comes to family planning, talking about, do we want to have a family? Do we want to get pregnant? Do we want to adopt? Do we want to never get pregnant? Should we use protection? These conversations happen more among those who plan to stay together than among those who are unsure of their outcome. And you might say, well, Christy, that makes sense. If you're unsure, you're just kind of like trying to work out all these chaotic things that might be going on around your relationship. You're not really close, so you're not going to be close enough to say, let's think long term. What are we going to do? And have deep, meaningful conversations. Okay, I get that logic. But you also see, I'm sure, how this is pretty scary, because the relationships in which, let's say, an unwanted pregnancy could be dealt with most smoothly, okay, with the satisfaction of all parties, of all the parties involved, are those who plan to stay together, right? So if, let's say, you had an unplanned pregnancy, you plan to stay together, you may decide to work this out together, right? And it's certainly going to be less stressful. But if this is a trial run, or you're just there for pure convenience, and now you have an unwanted pregnancy, oh my goodness. So the group that we want to encourage probably the most to communicate are those that are there together by pure convenience. So this is a little ironic, and I got to be honest, a little bit scary. But everybody should be talking about family planning, as we know from our other units. Cohabiting couples are more likely to experience dissatisfaction, domestic violence, and conflict when you compare them to the married batch. I've warned you about that, though, in the beginning of the semester. When you compared married data to cohabiting data, you need to watch out, because the married people have all probably been together a long time, people who long happy marriages, people in cohabiting relationships that were dissatisfied, they're in the cohabiting pool, but then they're going to drop out before they're in the married pool, so that inflates the positivity of marriage. But at the same time, marriage has lots of benefits, and people who commit to marriage are making each other happy with their commitment. And marital commitment is greater than cohabiting commitment for many couples, unless they see it as, common law, we're only ever going to do, some couples that's not the case, but for many couples, marriage is that higher commitment, and society certainly accepts it as such. So yeah, cohabiting couples are less satisfied. Remember that warning though, when you look at the year 1 data, it's about when you're living together, right? So you're dissatisfied after the first year of marriage, and you're dissatisfied after the first year of cohabitation. Well, you both live together. So there's something to be said about that. Okay, so dissatisfaction took care of that one. Domestic violence. They're going to experience more domestic violence than dating couples. What? You go from dating to cohabiting to marriage, and cohabiting has the most amount of violence. What's going on? Well, you've been together longer. You got that love. You got that strong commitment building. At the same time, you haven't had to commit like the married folk, right? But you live together. That's going to give you greater opportunities to isolate, to harm. And you may not have the resources like either of these two other groups. Single, and you can have your own place. So these are some of the many reasons why cohabiting couples experience a good bit of violence. So one of the things we want to think about is the cohabiting couples that slide into marriage rather than actively choose it. Oftentimes they do so because of something like an unwanted pregnancy, or they don't have other options, or even something like they're caught in this bad relationship. And we don't want people sliding into marriage. We want people actively choosing it. It's hard enough when you actively choose it and work your butt off at it and really care and are committed. So when people slide into marriage, that can be a very dangerous thing. And so the domestic violence couples, of course, if they experience in cohabitation, be mindful. It's not going to go down when they join the marital group. Those couples are very likely to continue that violence, and there is really no evidence to show that a violent cohabiting couple becomes unviolent when they are married. No, it's to the contrary. Then finally, the conflict group. Is conflict always bad? No, it's not always bad. It's the most, though, in cohabiting couples for some of the reasons that we've already talked about. So poor cohabitors, they've got these 3 things. And a lot of this is what authors call a selection effect, a selection bias. So people who select cohabiting instead of just dating or marriage often have traits that make that relationship difficult. At the same time, especially when we're talking about this plan to stay together group, that's very serious about commitment, they don't tend to have as many of those negative effects, and or they get out of the relationship before it becomes marriage, which I would argue is a very healthy thing. I told you why. So also think about those statistical reasons I mentioned before about time and attrition in the data. And we talked about relationship reasons and selection versus, is this a behavior thing? Is it a social thing? Okay, marriage. Live together, now you're getting married. This is what many consider to be the start of a new family union. Some people say you're not a family until you have kids. Think about what you think about that. That used to make me really mad before I had children. Married people are highly benefited. Well, it still makes me mad even after I have children, actually, now that I think about it. If you're 2 people highly committed to each other, even a very intimate friendship, and you feel a deep closeness, that you're family. But that's my way of thinking of families. So this is what most people consider to be the start of a new family. Married people are highly benefited. We talk about all of these things before. They live longer. They're happier, healthier. The first 4 years are the most difficult, especially the first. You're negotiating those marital expectations. You're recalibrating your idealization, and I love that. You idealize this thing, and now you got to recalibrate. Ugh. The dirty underwear's on the floor. Ugh. This was not in my idealized views of marriage. New social networks, including in-laws, just make it tricky, and change is always hard. 7-year itch is true. Yep. Greater propensity for cheating and for low satisfaction in the marriage, but it's not true in the sense that everyone has it. It's just a trend in the data. When is the greatest drop in satisfaction? When you become a parent. that first year. So the transition to parenthood, we see this plummet in marital satisfaction. There's the adjustment to make space for children. That means space in terms of where you live, space in terms of your pocketbook, space in terms of your time, space in terms of the resource, the emotional resources you put out in the communication. Child rearing and socialization. If two parents agree on how to rear the children and raise them, that agreement is a great increase in satisfaction. But for most people, they realize, wow, we actually disagree on some stuff. You don't believe in timeouts, you believe in spanking? Let's talk about this. Stressful. You're tired. Exhaustion. When we look at people who are sleep deprived, and particularly people who take little bursts of sleep instead of stints, even if it's a shorter stint, those little bursts of sleep and not getting enough sleep overall, those people are exhausted, and their brains look the same as people who suffer from clinical depression. Your body reacts as though it's depressed. You're not functioning well. You're not doing well. And so it's hard to think about all these effective communication strategies when you and your partner then are trying to figure out stuff with the kids. Meanwhile, managing the grandparent-grandchild and in-law bond is also mixed in there. Now your in-laws are grandparents, and you got to deal with them differently, and you got these new kids. It can be a big old bottle of stress. Still, it's very worth it. And I talked to you before about going up to number 11 on the dial, like in Spinal Tap, and that's how a lot of parents talk about the satisfaction and fulfillment that they experience as parents. Remember, too, that what satisfies us is not always what's best for us. You know, I doubt that all of you, when you stay up late working on these assignments and learning, I doubt you're like, oh, I'm always so satisfied when I do this. Well, not right this minute, but when you go to bed finally and you think about all that you're doing to better yourself, you feel amazing. You feel fulfilled by that. So even though things don't instantly gratify us, that doesn't mean that they don't deeply fulfill us, and it doesn't mean they aren't worth doing. And parenting is one of the best examples of that. Middle adulthood and family. We see an empty nest effect. There are shifts in communication for couples that are married and their children are gone. Some of them go the route of renewing vows. And the communicative value of that is it reminds you as a couple of who you are now and who you were. And you're showing that in this ritualistic way. It's a way to resolve dialectical tensions of private versus and public life. I shouldn't say versus, it's a both and. Stability and change and conventionality and uniqueness. A lot of times when people get married the first time, they didn't have the resources to do what they want, and they didn't feel like it was their own. They didn't maybe and sometimes know who they were as a couple. But now that they're older, they do know who they are as a couple, and they're working that out. You're sandwiched between the younger and the older family members. So in middle adulthood, you're helping your aging parents, and a lot of times you're helping your adult children. And so there's so much responsibility there that, and shifts in communication. Older adulthood, we talk more about in FamCommCh10, which is my favorite class, one of my favorite classes to teach. Just because a lot of people think they're not going to like it, and you gotta like it. You have to love it. It's so good. Older adulthood, we have the same issues of younger people and families. So everything that we've been talking about thus far in families, it still applies. All the positive comm stuff, all the things to do and not do still applies. And we also see even more role reversals and shifts. Caregiving for a spouse, caregiving from a spouse, and from your adult children. Think about what that's like. To care for your children and then to go all these years of hard work and providing for them and grandchildren, and then all of a sudden they're providing for you. Some people see this as a very beautiful thing. It's hard, too, for a lot of older adults. We do see consistency across support for kids and needs for intimacy, etc. So the things that had been going on up to this point in life, they just continue into older adulthood. Marriage maintenance in older adulthood, flirting and sex, yes, still. And we talked about the benefits of that, and no one should be doing that more than older adults, especially considering the declines in health as we age. Also, the adjustment to children-in-law, all these things, big deals. Grandparent-grandchild relationships. Grandparents are closest. Grandparent-grandchild is closest to parent-child in terms of overall influence. And you might be thinking, you just said that about siblings. I know, it's tricky business. But when we talk about the socialization, a lot of researchers argue because grandparents influence the parents and parents influence the children, and also grandchildren directly influence the grandchildren, they are a huge factor. Can't disagree with that. We see an increasing number of custodial grandparents too, and of course their influence is even greater because they are the primary influencer of the children in the home. Some final points. So I just through all of these things in life that are really normative stressors because you know what? You expect them. This is a trajectory that's manifest in movies, it's manifest in family storytelling, that when you're at this stage of life, you do this, when you're at this stage, you do this. So they're normative. You expect that life stage. So things like money, children, conflict, work, health, and maybe even conflict. If you're a comm scholar and you know that conflict is normal, you expect these things, right? And particularly if they occur at the stage you want, you're expecting children at about age 25. You get them somewhere between 25 and 35. Woo! That's what I thought would happen. It's a normative stressor. But when we talk about non-normative stressors, those are stressors which are unexpected for that life stage. So the children one, you have a child when you're 17. That wasn't how you thought that was going to work out, so that's stressor. Or you're a parent whose child has a child at 17, your grandparent at 17. Okay, I knew this was coming, but I didn't know it at this stage. So that becomes non-normative. So some other things that are non-normative stressors are the conflict. If you're a non-comm scholar, you don't get it, that's part of relationships. Things like infidelity and betrayal, divorce, abuse, homelessness, death, particularly your death of your parents and death of your children. So these are things that we really don't anticipate, even though empirically there's a lot of evidence that suggests that they could happen to us. I'm sure you know this. When it's a normative stressor, there's a little bit of a relief from that. But a stressor is a stressor. A stressor is anything that causes us that psychological discomfort. It's a change, any major change from what we're usually experiencing. And so stressors are hard on us. I want to point out this last thing because we don't have a lot of time to talk about what's in Chapter 11 that's delicious. So stressors were first studied following the Great Depression. And I think you can imagine family stress and family stressors were studied following the Great Depression. I'm sure you can imagine why. After the Great Depression, everyone is experiencing this awful circumstance, right? People are losing everything. And some families they plummeted. They fell apart. The people within them fell apart. The family structure fell apart. But other families, though they still had these external pressures and they still had this stressor, they were resilient. They grew stronger. They focused differently. They worked together as a team. And so scholars really wanted to understand deeply so they could share that with other families, how to make that work so pleasantly. And it probably doesn't surprise you that so much of it is about how they frame the stressor, how they see the stressor as an opportunity to grow or not, and also the resources within the family and outside of the family. So I want you to know those very few things about stressors in and of themselves, but on your exam I'm going to have you focus on that lifespan. And of course, rely on your review sheet. I strongly encourage you to write a discussion question that helps you in your thinking and helps you prepare for the test as well. You can do it from either of the 2 units. And please reach out to each other and reach out to me if you need any assistance. I am so happy to have had you in class.